Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Miss Natalia's Garden of Children Literacy. It has been such a long time since I've seen you guys, but I'm so happy that I am back and that you guys are here watching, and we're gonna have a very, very fun video today. Today, we are going to learn about a fun topic about books. Since this is literacy, and literacy basically means books, it would make sense that we would talk about all different kinds of stories. Because stories don't all sound or have the same characters. Some of them can talk about animals, while others talk about crazy wizard worlds and magic. They can be real, which is nonfiction, or they can be fake and made up, and that's called fiction. Today, we're going to talk about Miss Natalia's favorite genre, which is folk literature. So, all traditional stories that you might have heard of when you were little, or otherwise known as bedtime stories, are all considered folk literature stories. And what makes folk literature stories important and makes them stand out from others is that there is no real author, because we are talking about stories that were only passed on by people talking to and passing it only by mouth. There were no books, there were no writing, it was all through using their mouths. And so they would tell their children. And then when those children grow up, they would tell their children. And it would pass on over, through many, many, many generations. And when people asked who the author was, well, nobody knew, because it was a story that was heard from their parents, who heard it from their parents, who heard it from their parents. So there is no real author to all these folk literature stories, which makes it very interesting. Pourquoi tales is the French term for why. Pourquoi means why. Why? Folk literature has stories that explain why things are the way they are, and why we believe in morals, and why we know good versus bad. Those are all tales that we learn from. There are a lot of subgenres or other categories within folk literature, because there are so many stories that we need to organize each one into groups. So the first one is tall tales. And when we talk about tall tales, we talk about exaggerated stories that have characters who perform unrealistic or impossible things. So stories like Cinderella and her godmother, that is unrealistic because nobody has magic like that in real life. However, it is a story that everybody knows. Everybody has heard of Cinderella. However, it's different because there is no such thing as a pumpkin turning into a carriage, is it? The other subgenre is a fable. A fable is my favorite kind of stories because they're short stories that clearly teach a moral or a lesson. So most of these stories, their parents tell their children so their children can understand an important lesson about life. And that's how they pass it on. And when those children grow up, they use the exact same stories to teach their children lessons. Myths are symbolic stories. So they have symbols that ancient people used to use to explain their world. So there would be a lot of myths or stories about that seem unrealistic, but because it happened in a different world, the ancient people just wanted to show their world, to say, hey, this is my world, these are my stories, and I'm going to show them to you. That's what a myth is. And the last one is legends. And legends is a traditional story that of people, and it's often based on true events. So people back in the day would take a true event like a bad storm and make a legend about how a god of the thunder made this happen because this happened, and they would make a legend of it, and it would be based on true events. Now, myths and legends are based off of true things that actually happen, while fables and tall tales are unrealistic and are not based off true events, so they're not real. So, since we got some stories that are not real, it kind of fits in with modern fantasy, doesn't it? Because modern fantasy means not real. That's what fantasy is. It means that it's not real, that it's impossible to happen in real life. But there is a lot of different things between modern fantasy and folk literature, such as folk literature is more focused on trying to teach kids lessons or trying to teach someone a lesson based on life, or trying to help explain why something is the way it is. And modern fantasy is mainly used to create this whole different world. It's supposed to be for the imagination of the reader to just go into this whole different world of wizards or of dragons, of adventures. And however it might sound the same because they have unrealistic or impossible feats, that doesn't mean that they are the same story, because one tries to teach a lesson and the other one tries to improve your imagination. So, some of the books that I really want to recommend to my students is The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen, because it talks about beauty within. It is a fable. The Little Match Girl is a cultural book, or a cultural story about a little girl who's out in the cold. She is trying to keep herself warm, and she has to light the matches that she's trying to sell, and she's taken to this magic world of warmth and happiness. Rapunzel is about a princess that's locked in a really tall tower with super long hair, and a prince finds out about her and tries to find her. The Lion and the Mouse is a story based that is about helping each other out and being humble around each other. John Henry, An American Legend, is about, there it says, an American legend about a man who was able to build a tunnel in a mountain by using only 2 sledgehammers. The Three Little Wolves and the Big Bad Pig is a story of how it switches the roles around. So instead of the 3 little pigs, it's going to be the 3 little wolves and the bad pig. And The Boy Who Cried Wolf by Aesop is that the author is important because Aesop is a Greek philosopher who is teaching these stories or these fables to young children so that they would understand not to ever lie. This is a reading about the Little Match Girl story that I was telling you about. Her little hands were almost numbed with cold. Oh, a match might afford her a world of comfort if she only dared to take a single one out of the bundle, dry it against the wall, and warm her fingers by it. She drew one out. How it blazed, how it burnt! It was warm, bright flame, like a candle, as she held her hands over it. It was a wonderful light. It seemed really to the little maiden as though she were sitting before a large iron stove, with burnished brass feet and brass ornaments at top. The fire burned with such blessed influence. It was warm so delightfully. The little girl had already stretched out her feet to warm them too, but the small flame went out and the stove vanished. She had only the remains of the burnt-out match in her hand. John Henry, another story that I mentioned by Ezra Jack Keats. John Henry's hammer whistled as he swung. Choo, choo, clatter, rattled the machine. Great chunks of rock fell as John Henry ripped a hole after hole into the tunnel wall. The machine rattled and whistled and drilled even faster. Then John Henry took a deep breath, picked up 2 sledgehammers, and sang, "Ain't no hammer struck such fire. Strike like lightning, Lord, I won't tire." So those are just examples of wonderful stories that you guys should definitely read. Some might be a little longer than others, but that shouldn't matter because they are so interesting that it'll keep you hooked on like a worm on a fishing hook. So I recommend you guys to read as many folk literature stories because that's how you will know so many lessons about life and you'll get to know so much history about the entire world. So thank you so much for joining with me in this fun lesson about folk literature, and I hope you guys try to read those books, and I hope you had fun and have a wonderful time. Bye.